Good morning, Catherine. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our first question is, what sparked your interest in engineering?
Well, interestingly enough, I almost didn't become an engineer because my dad is a civil engineer, and I thought that engineering was just building bridges and roads, and that didn't sound very exciting to me. So I had ruled that out as a profession. I was lucky enough that I went to a summer school between my final years of school at the local university, and we spent a week just going to classes on different careers, different courses, and that was the first time I'd ever heard about chemical engineering, which is what I then went on to study. I'd always loved chemistry at high school, really enjoyed it, and it sounded really interesting when I heard about the course, and then managed to find contacts through my dad to talk to actual chemical engineers to see whether it was what I was interested to do, and I'm very glad I made the decision and I haven't looked back.
We're happy also that you have made such a decision. And what does a typical day of work involve?
So currently, I work for Technip in Malaysia. We are a part of a project management team supporting Petronas to build a new oil refinery and petrochemical plant in the south of Malaysia. So it's a really, really big project. And my area is supporting all of the different engineering contractors on the project. So there's overall there's sort of 25 different engineering contractors doing the design and the construction for the whole plant. And I'm supporting them to understand the requirements for hazards and effects management. So when I talk to the average layperson, that's making sure we design a plant that doesn't blow up, doesn't leak stuff to the environment, is safe essentially to operate. So it means, on a day-to-day, I'm writing procedures, I'm reviewing documents, I'm talking to contractors, answering questions, and it's quite interesting.
Very interesting. Was your career path straightforward? Were there any obstacles that you had to overcome?
I don't think any career path is straightforward. I think probably I had a few different obstacles, and it's usually been from changing direction or the focus of what I was doing. The first 2 years after I graduated, I actually did more business development, supply and logistics. So less what I would call, technical engineering. It was really interesting, really great work. I really enjoyed it. But then when I went back to more, technical support engineering at an oil refinery that I used to work, I was a few years behind my colleagues in terms of they'd been doing that kind of work for a few years, and after 3 years out of uni, I just started back into it. So that was a big learning curve. The next thing that time I did a change was when I decided to move out of working on an operating plant into design. So I'd been, that was about 7 years out for me, and so it was the same, another big change in terms of people with my level of experience having done design their whole career. I had a lot of catching up to do. Thankfully, I found a lot of my operating experience. Meant I had a lot of skills that were very, very useful. But the two kind of big jumps in direction have been probably obstacles to overcome.
Thank you. Do you think that there is a stereotype of female engineers? Is this negative? Is this positive?
I don't think there's enough of a stereotype. I think that's probably more the issue, in that when people think engineers, they don't think female. I'm sure yourself, Angela, have had the experience where you say, "Oh, I'm an engineer," and people go, "Oh, really? There's not very many girls in that, is there?" So I think the lack of stereotype for me is the issue, and that when you're at school, because we're not a public facing profession, so you go to a doctor and you go to a lawyer, but the average person doesn't go to an engineer. They don't really know what we do, and therefore we don't have a lot of stereotypes that females tend to think, "Oh, that sounds like an interesting thing I might want to pursue as a career."
Okay. Have you ever worked abroad in a country where attitudes towards women have been different to what they are in your home country? Do you have any advice for any female engineers who are considering working in such countries?
Yeah, so working in Malaysia is my first time working abroad from Australia. And I did actually research it a fair bit before I chose to come to accept a role here. Well, I was very excited to find out that Malaysia actually has the most chartered female IChemE members across the whole of IChemE. So I figured that it must be a reasonably open place for professional women. And I guess it's a predominantly Muslim country, which is different to Australia also. However, I really working here, I have not found it an issue at all. There's very much an expectation that professional women continue on with their career, particularly after children as well, which I notice in Australia a lot more women drop out after having children. So actually to start out with, all of the senior people I was working with on the client side were all females. Unfortunately, that's changed now. I'm a bit more on the male side. But I think it's something definitely to consider. I know other women I'm working with on my project have had more issues, and they're in, say, things like procurement or cost control. They've actually had a lot more issues in terms of being marginalised in terms of their opinion, and had to figure out different ways to work in with the culture. So for me, it hasn't been an issue being a female here. More the challenge has been working in a very different culture in terms of communication styles compared to Australia. I think my advice would be, yes, it's certainly something to consider, and yes, it's worth researching and talking to people already working there. But in the end of the day, there's only a few countries that I really wouldn't go somewhere like Saudi Arabia, where they don't really encourage women to work. Apart from that, I think everywhere can work if you want it to.
What advice do you have for those of us who are just starting out in engineering? Would this advice be different for female and male engineers?
I think my advice for male and female is there's a really fantastic book that's been published recently called The Making of an Expert Engineer. This has been published by Professor James Trevelyan from the University of Western Australia. And it's based on 10 years of research in terms of engineering practice. And it makes some really fantastic points in terms of what we actually do in our jobs. It wasn't really previously researched or documented. And it really highlights that technical, what people consider technical skills, the only not the majority part of our job, and that a lot of our work depends on being an effective communicator, an effective team builder, being able to find the right people who have the right information to solve the problems, because you're never going to know everything. So that's a really great place to start. I think for females, the most useful resource I've tapped into more recently is the book Lean In, which is by the CEO Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook. That made me some really good points in terms of some of the challenges we face in more male-dominated industries, and how you can potentially counteract those. So for me, it's more just being aware as a female that some of the differences that we have naturally, and how potentially to counteract that and make the most of some of our differences.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you for your time and for joining us today from Kuala Lumpur.
You're most welcome.